Folks, let me ask you a very simple question. Do you think it's possible to read over 90 years worth of comic books in a human lifespan? Is it possible? According to my calculations, the answer is yes, as long as you're willing to spend the next 18 years of your life reading 10 comics a day. Most people would hear that and say, that's a big commitment. I don't want to do that, so I'm not going to, ever. I'm not even going to attempt that. Luckily, I'm not most people. I have made the commitment to read every single DC comic, which will take me 18 years if I continue reading 10 a day. Now, you're probably thinking, Rhinohorn, what is wrong with you? Why would you do this? What could possibly drive you to make such an insane commitment? Well, the truth is, I love comic books. I love superheroes. I have since I was 7 years old and I first saw the Flash TV show, which led to me getting my first comic book called Flashpoint by Jeff Johns, and the rest is history. To go a little more in depth on why I'm doing this, one day after my 17th birthday, I came to a realization about superheroes, about comic books, and my understanding of them. I realized I wasn't reading enough. I didn't feel as interested as I should have been. I didn't feel like I knew enough to participate in the conversations I wanted to participate in. I felt like I didn't have enough time to read any comic books, really. Now, faced with this realization, a normal person would probably say, okay, I'll try to make more time to read some more comic books, I'll try to figure something out. Fortunately, I'm not a normal person, so instead, my first thought was, what if I just read all of them? And that's why I'm sitting here. I decided that I would spend the next 18 years of my life reading 10 comics a day. I'm making this video because I'm now a month in. And despite 10 comics a day not sounding like a lot, it builds up pretty quickly. It builds up really quickly, especially considering how insanely long some Golden Age comics are. Most Golden Age comics are. All Golden Age comics are. They're like 60 pages each. That's 600 pages a day. It takes me a good... it fluctuates, but it takes me like a good few hours to get through my daily comics. Anyhow, now that we're all through this preamble stuff, we can move on to the reason you are actually here, the comics. In 1922, a young major in the Army named Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson was court-martialed for writing an open letter to the president criticizing the Army command. Wheeler Nicholson was sent home and decided to become a writer. He published his own book called Modern Cavalry and eventually began writing short stories for pulp magazines. By 1925, he was a pretty big name in the industry for the time, at least, and founded his own company named after himself, which would eventually begin adapting the novel Treasure Island, but in comic format. Then came 1935. After seeing the rise in popularity of comic magazines, Wheeler Nicholson had an idea. He founded National Allied Publications with the intention of revolutionizing the comic book industry, which he would succeed in. See, comic magazines at the time consisted of mostly reprinted material from newspapers. There was some original material in there, but it was mostly just to fill out pages, and so was fairly rare. This made the release of New Fun number 1 in February 1935 the first time a comic magazine contained all 100% purely original material. And that is where my journey began. Now, New Fun number 1, despite being very original and revolutionizing, kinda sucked a bit, if I'm being completely honest. It was not great. I wouldn't say there was nothing good, but it was 68 pages of pretty bad to mid, 2 to 4 page stories. And when I say bad to mid, I mean mid at the absolute best. Most of them were pretty bad. Some of the more memorable characters and stories featured in New Fun number 1 were Jack Woods, which followed a sheriff in the Wild West, Magic Crystal of History, which followed 2 kids who discovered a magic crystal that teleported them to the past, and they were stuck in Egypt for most of that one. Wing Brady, which followed an American soldier who is also a very skilled pilot. Sandra of the Secret Service, a woman who worked for the Secret Service and investigated countries like Gavonia and Resbia. Oswald the Rabbit, Walt Disney's original creation, which would force him to create Mickey Mouse because at the time, Universal owned the rights to Oswald. Don Drake, a astronaut who explored the planet Sero. 2023 Super Police, which I actually can't even begin to explain. That one is insane. Some crazy things happen. Barry O'Neill, who was a member of the Secret Service that fought against an evil Chinese ruler. and many more stories. As you can tell from, some of the description of that last one, some of these were pretty racist. A lot of them were very racist, actually. There were caricatures of black people. Every villain was Chinese or Mexican. There were depictions of savage natives. A lot of stuff like that. On top of that, even Sandra of the Secret Service, whose main character was a woman, was pretty misogynistic. It treated Sandra as an idiot most of the time. It was bad. Not that surprising, considering it was 1935, but still, I figured I'd mention it. Let's fast forward a few months to October 1935. New Fun was now on its 6th issue. This issue introduced a character named Dr. Occult, National Allies' first mystery man, which basically just meant it was a character with a secret identity, but wasn't really a superhero. Now, Dr. Occult utilized his magic abilities to fight off werewolves, vampires, and other mystical beasts and individuals. Dr. Occult was written and drawn by 2 men named Ledger and Ruths. Who? Huh? Who's that? You probably don't recognize those names. I didn't recognize those names at first when I first started this journey. Ledger and Ruths were pen names, aliases, for 2 Jewish immigrants named Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. You probably recognize those names. This would mark the very first time Siegel and Shuster would work for National Allied. And obviously, as we all know, they would do a lot for the company. In December of 1935, National Allied would release the first issue of their second monthly title, New Comics, which would eventually become known as Adventure Comics. The second issue of this title would feature a story called Federal Men, which would introduce Steve Carson, a member of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. This would be the second character Siegel and Shuster would write for National Allied. In my opinion, this is one of their best. I love Federal Men, at least the early issues. There's an early plot that lasts like 7 issues where Steve takes down a huge conspiracy to overthrow the government, and there's like a whole empire behind it. There's a later Federal Men plot where Steve loses his memory and becomes a proficient criminal. There's also one where he stops the JFK assassination and in the same issue catches O.J. Simpson, which is a little weird that both of those coincidences happened 20 years, at least 20 years before either of those incidences took place. Crazy coincidences, and it's even crazier that they both happened in the same issue. Honestly, for a while after the start of New Comics, things moved pretty smoothly forward. Not a whole lot happened. The stories were generally alright. They were, like I said, generally mediocre at best, but things like Dr. Occult and Federal Men were, a cut above the rest. Sometimes there'd be a hidden gem, like Don Coyote, which is always fun. Then eventually, I got to March of 1937, the release of a comic Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson had been wanting to release for a while. Something he'd been working on, something he had been aiming towards. A comic entirely focused on mysteries and detectives. Detective Comics number 1. This issue, the first issue, introduced characters like Speed Saunders, who is part of the River Patrol, Cosmo, who is a detective and a master of disguise, and of course, my favorite DC character of all time, Slam Mother freaking Bradley. Slam is a tall private detective who's as smart as he is buff. He works with his partner Shorty to take on wacky and hilarious crimes while completely taking it seriously themselves. Kind of like an early Scooby-Doo in ways. Slam was thought up by Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson, but was written and developed by Siegel and Shuster, who really made him their own with their unique writing and art. They did take some inspiration from another character they'd been working on since 1933, who I'll talk about a bit more later, and I'm sure you can guess who I'm talking about. To be honest, dude, every Slam Bradley issue was amazing. Just amazing. Now, Detective Comics didn't just introduce new characters. It revolutionized the game as a whole. And the company. National Allied and Detective were now 2 separate companies which would eventually merge into one, but that wouldn't happen for a few years. Like New Comics, Detective Comics had just as many pages as New Fun did, but was now physically smaller. The size, the dimensions being more similar to what we imagine comics to be today. While between the covers, the amount of pages stayed the same, the stories themselves became significantly longer, and there were fewer of them because they were longer. The stories now average about 13 pages per story and would continue to grow until they reached the about 20-30 amount we are used to today. Then I made it to the worst day in comic book history. September 29th, 1937. On this day, Feature Funnies #1 was released. And it was a dark, dark, dark day, let me tell you. If you think DC is bad now, you don't understand Feature Funnies. You have never read Feature Funnies, because I promise you have never even touched something worse than Feature Funnies. There's nothing redeeming about this book. Not a single thing. Every comic book I've ever read has something redeeming about it. Something. But there's nothing. With Feature Funnies, there's nothing. There's absolutely nothing. It's not just bad, it's boring. It's absurdly boring. It's so boring it physically hurts me to read it. And it's not like they couldn't be funny back then. I've read plenty of comics from this same company that have made me laugh. New comics, new fun comics. Feature Funny, it's just bad. It's just bad. It's just bad. Because some stupid executive decided to greenlight the worst comic book you'd ever think of. A comic book that's entire point is to be funny, but fails exceedingly at that. It fails at the one thing it's supposed to do. The one thing. The other comics, their goal is to get entertaining and funny and exciting and adventurous. They have multiple jobs, and they succeed at all of them. Sometimes they fail, yes. A lot of the time they fail, but at least they succeed sometimes. Feature Funnies doesn't succeed at its one job ever. Not one time does it succeed. I'm still reading this terrible, terrible, vile, aggressively disgusting piece of fiction to this day. I'm still stuck, and it's called Feature Comics now. Guess what? That doesn't stop it from being terrible. It's a name change, but the contents are still terrible. There's nothing redeeming about this book. Nothing. There's nothing interesting. There's nothing funny. It is the worst part of my day. If reading these comics is normally the best part of my day. When I get to Feature Funnies, guess what? I want to kill myself. I want to end it because it's so bad. It's so bad. Oh, shit, I have a headache from that. I would like to apologize for my outburst and quickly move on. I do not apologize to Feature Funnies, but I do apologize to those who had to watch me get so angry about it. After Feature Funnies, for a little less than a year, a couple days for me, not much happened. Stories were told, I laughed, I enjoyed Slam Bradley, blah 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 blah. To be honest, I was only about 8 days into the journey at this point, and I was already getting kind of burned out. The way I made videos was much different at the time, even though it was only a month ago. I would stream myself reading the comics live and then edit that VOD down and upload the video later, rather than just reading the comics throughout the day and then reviewing them, once I'm finished, which is much more efficient, by the way. But I do remember this day specifically. I just finished editing my daily video and was looking up what comics I would have to read for the next day. At the time, I thought I wouldn't get to Superman until Thursday that week. It was currently Monday that week, so when I found out it was actually Tuesday that week, aka tomorrow when I'd be getting to Superman, I got really excited. However, despite my excitement, I did realize that I wasn't going to be able to do it the way I normally did it. Realistically, I had the realization that my streams kinda sucked, like a lot, and they were 10 times less entertaining than just reviewing them would be. So, I decided that Tuesday morning, I'd wake up early before school, record myself reading out loud the entirety of the Superman part of Action Comics #1, and then throughout the day, I'd read the other comics and review them, and put it in a formal review video. The way I did it, the first day wasn't perfect, but by the third time I did it, I, had it down. Now, back to Action Comics #1 itself. Siegel and Shuster had come up with Superman back in 1933 and had been trying to get him published since. They kept getting denied and denied and denied. No one wanted to publish this character because of some resemblance he held to another character, and people were afraid of copyright. Finally, they were going to be given a shot by National Allied, mostly because they had both a good relationship with Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson, and the execs figured, if it doesn't work, we'll just scrap the character. Luckily, as I'm sure you know, it worked out pretty freaking well. Not only did Action #1 introduce Superman, one of the most important characters of all time, in my opinion, it also introduced Zatara, who would eventually be the father of Zatanna, who is a pretty popular magic superhero. This doesn't mean Zatara is one of the earliest superheroes, as old as Superman. Now, Golden Age Superman is interesting. It's fun to see him develop a lot of his iconic traits, but he's also kind of like a big, just a jerk. He's a bad guy, honestly. Not only does he kill a lot of people, like so many people, but he's also just a weirdo towards a Lois Lane. Like, there's one time where he genuinely gets upset that Lois won't give him the time of the day. In a thought bubble, he's like, why doesn't she like me? Even though the point of his, Clark Kent act is for her to not like him. You're putting on an act to make her not like you and then getting mad that she doesn't like you. One time, he's trying to come up with a plot to force her to work with him after she says, I don't like you. He's like, hey Lois, why don't you like me? She says, I just don't like you. He goes to his boss and is like, hey, make her do a story with me. The boss is like, okay. So he's just a bad guy. He's just not a good guy. It's really funny. He's like a pretty awesome guy as Superman, but then when he becomes Clark Kent, he becomes a completely different guy almost. The stories themselves are pretty fun, of course. It's clear that Siegel and Shuster had something very special, not just with the character and mythos, but with their magical writing and art. In November, New Comics officially became Adventure Comics, and then in April of 1939, All American Comics #1, Movie Comics #1, and New York World's Fair #1 were all released. All American Comics introduced characters like the three soldiers known as Red, Whitey, and Bluey in a story called Red, White, and Blue, as well as Adventures into the Unknown. And will eventually introduce Green Lantern, but as of right now, as of writing this, All American is still pretty mid. Movie Comics would only go on for 6 issues and would adapt movies into comics. Obviously, it was the 1930s, so there wasn't really a whole lot of good movies to pick from, to be honest. Also, it is kind of crazy to think that the first movie technically predates the first modern comic book, which would be New Fun #1, would be the first modern comic book. And the first movie was made in like the 80s of 1800, like the 1880s. That's crazy. New York World's Fair Comics contained a bunch of stories of different National Allied / DC characters at, you guessed it, the New York World Fair. It featured the first appearance of the Sandman and wouldn't get a second issue until years and years later. May of 1939 saw the first appearance of Batman, spelled with a hyphen, in Detective Comics #27. Created by Bill Finger and Bob Kane, mostly Bill Finger, even though Bob Kane got all the credit. There is a little bit more nuance to it than people give, comic writers and artists were very disrespected at the time, and if Bob Kane hadn't fought for credits, neither of them would have gotten credits. That doesn't mean he shouldn't have fought for Bill Finger's credits too. That doesn't mean what he did wasn't wrong. It just means there's a bit more nuance to it. Batman's first appearance is only 7 pages long and isn't really anything special, but it was fun to read. He looks and acts a lot different, killing people left and right. And during this time, he had a fiancée named Julie Madison, even though she didn't appear too often. Alfred didn't exist, and Jim Gordon has been around since the first appearance of Batman, which is pretty cool. In June of that same year, Superman #1 was released, marking the first ever DC comic to focus on one character and one character only. Or does it? No, it doesn't. Technically, it's the second. The first would be Mutt and Jeff #1, which I actually couldn't find anywhere. I literally could not read this one because it just doesn't exist on the internet anywhere. I'm honestly not certain it does exist at all. I think it might be a psyop. Back to Superman. The first issue of his very own book. Nothing too original here. The only new material was an expanded origin story and prologue to his first appearance in Action Comics #1, with the rest of the book being reprints of his first 4 appearances. Superman #2 would be the first comic focusing on one character to contain all original material, as Mutt and Jeff #1 was mostly reprints from newspapers. A month later, Sandman would join the cast of Adventure Comics and would stick around there for a while. The month after that was a very important one. Mystery Men Comics #1 and Smash Comics #1 were both released. Between the 2 books, they introduced a total of 5 characters I believe could be considered superheroes. Blue Beetle, Zanzibar, Invisible Hood, Hugh Hazard and his Iron Man, not that Iron Man, and of course, Green Mask. Sadly, only one of those characters is relevant today, Green Mask. Of course it's Green Mask. We all know it's Green Mask. To me, this marked a change in the industry. A massive shift, moving away from more basic, grounded spy thrillers, explorers, and comedic characters, and beginning the age of superheroes, which still runs strong today. Blue Beetle is the only one of these three characters I have anything to say about, and all I have to say about him is that his first two costumes suck, and he's called Dan Garrett here, rather than the more popular Ted Kord or Jaime Reyes. Ted Kord would be introduced in the Silver Age, and I don't know when Jaime Reyes gets introduced. Also, Zanzibar is the first DC character to beat a god, and Green Mask doesn't do anything. So those are the important highlights. In December of the big 3-9, Blue Beetle will get his own book, and he would finally stop looking like Judo Master. Now, what amazing comics did National Allied release in January of 1940? Almost 10 years since it existed. Well, they would create their most iconic comic yet. Double Action Comics number 2. Wait, number 2? Yes, number 2. There is no number 1. Like, it actually doesn't exist. There's one issue of Double Action Comics, and it's number 2. On top of that, Double Action Comics isn't even original material. It's just a bunch of reprints from the pre-superhero era with characters like Sandra of the Secret Service and Dr. Occult. Like Feature Comics, this is a useless comic, but at least it contains some good stories, unlike Feature Funnies, the worst... Sorry, I'm not going to start that again. That same month, National Allied would also release Flash Comics number 1, which introduced... Guess by the title. Yep, you guessed it, Hawkman. Just kidding. It did introduce Hawkman, but it also introduced the Flash, of course. Jay Garrick. It's funny how Jay Garrick is always old in modern comics, but Carter Hall, who's existed the exact same amount of time, is like 35 or like 3,500. But I don't think reincarnation works like that. Actually, yeah, 35. Anyways, in February of this year, the actual 5-year anniversary, More Fun Comics would feature his first superhero, the Spectre. And let me tell you, the Spectre is freaking awesome. I've never been a particularly big fan of the Spectre. I like Hal Jordan's stint as him, but his powers are so cool. His origin here is a little bit different from his modern one, from what I can tell, but the basics of him being a dead spirit who wields the power of vengeance is all there. Also this month, we got our very first child superhero in Shazam, who was called Captain Marvel at the time. That's right, Captain Marvel predates Marvel Comics. Something to think about. We also got the first appearance of Robin just a month later, proving just how popular bloodthirsty 9-year-olds were back then. Billy Batson, age 12, threatens to kill a guy in his first appearance. Robin does kill multiple guys in his first appearance. What are they feeding these kids? Now, it's around here the dates start getting kind of confusing. The way comic books were dated was weird back then, with them putting the date published as around 3 months after the book was actually published to extend its shelf life. This caused quite a few discrepancies. For example, the cover date of Batman number 1, which contains Robin, is set a month before Robin's first appearance in Detective Comics number 38. Also, there are events in Superman number 4 that directly follow up Action Comics number 23, which was supposedly released a month later. This made things really difficult on my end. Luckily, it's usually pretty easy to catch, and in the case where it isn't easy to catch, it usually isn't important anyways, but I am worried about this being a problem in the future. Moving on, around this time, just shortly after the first appearance of Robin, not only do we get the first appearance of the Joker baby, who is shown to be a serial killer that employs genius tactics to kill his targets in mysterious and confusing ways, but we also get the first appearance of Lex Luthor, a super genius, mad scientist who manipulates 2 countries into a war and aims to turn it into a global conflict, allowing him to take over the world. That sounds like a plotline I've heard before in a recent Superman movie, maybe. That's right. Superman and Batman face off against their most iconic enemies for the first time almost sequentially. It's also really funny that, well, Batman saving the Joker from falling from his death is, from what I remember, the first time he's ever gone out of his way to save a villain. Superman not only lets Lex Luthor die, Lex Luthor does eventually return, but also goes out of his way to not save him. just proof of how big of a dick Superman was back in the day. On that note, with the introductions of the Joker and Lex Luthor, some of the most iconic comic villains of all time, I have completed the first month of this journey, from September 1st to September 30th. There were many a high, like Slam Bradley. There were many a low, like Feature Funnies, which is called Feature Comics now. I already talked about this. Doesn't matter. Stop. Not gonna talk about it again. Anyway, if you made it to the end of this video, I truly do appreciate it. The journey is going to take a very large chunk of my life, and I'm grateful to anyone who joined me for it. If you made it this far, I would love if you could like the video, leave a comment, share with your friends, anything that'll help me push this further to the algorithm. I'm really trying to make this work, and this is my passion, and I think this journey has something special in it. Anyhow, thank you all for watching. I'm Rhino7. Goodbye, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace!
Rhino 7.